The sun beat down hard on the cracked dirt streets of Marlow, a forgotten town barely clinging to life. Dust swirled like ghosts in the wind, and every building looked abandoned, its windows blind to the world outside. It was the kind of town that seemed to forget its own name, with only a few souls who still dared to live here. John Ace Callahan rode into town, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. He was a man who didn't belong anymore. His reputation had long since outlived his desire for a fight, but there was something different about this town, something that felt like a final chapter waiting to be written. He didn't come for trouble, but when you've got a past like his, trouble always seems to find you. In the bar, the whispers followed him like a shadow, quiet at first, then louder with each passing hour. That's Ace Callahan, the man who put down more than one outlaw, they'd say, their voices laced with awe and fear. But Ace didn't care about what they thought. He was just here to pass through, to forget what had haunted him for years. Until he heard about Hale. Hale was the kind of man who had no mercy, who owned this town with a grip so tight it choked any hope the people had left. He'd taken everything, their land, their dignity, and their future. And he was coming for Ace. The bar was quieter that night, the low murmur of conversation interrupted only by the occasional clink of glass. Ace kept to himself in the corner, his gaze steady, like a man who knew the weight of every choice he made. He tried to drown out the past in the glass before him, but it was always there, lingering at the edges of his thoughts. It wasn't until he overheard the conversation between two old-timers that the town's true depth of suffering hit him. They spoke of Hale like a storm on the horizon, unstoppable and ever looming. His men had burned down the church. They'd taken land from families that had lived there for generations. They'd beaten anyone who dared to oppose him. But it wasn't until they mentioned a young woman, Sarah, that Ace felt something inside him stir. Her father had been the town sheriff, a man Ace owed his life to. Years ago, the sheriff had saved Ace during a shootout with a rival gang. Ace had promised to repay him, but the guilt of never fulfilling that promise had always eaten at him. The young woman's father was dead now, and Hale's men had been the ones to kill him. And now, Sarah was next on Hale's list, locked away in his grasp as leverage to flush out any remaining resistance in the town. Ace's jaw clenched. He'd seen countless towns fall under the weight of men like Hale. But this felt different. This was personal. He stood up, leaving the bar behind him, and walked toward the dusty streets. His boots echoed in the empty silence, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He could walk away, disappear like he always did. But then what? The thought of Sarah's face, innocent and scared, was enough to make him turn back. Ace was done running. The town square was eerily quiet the next morning. The sun hung low, casting long shadows on the dusty streets as Ace moved through town, preparing for what was coming. He wasn't here to start a war. He was here to end one. Sarah was still locked up in Hale's mansion, hidden from the rest of the town. Word spread that Hale had promised to release her only if Ace came forward, making the showdown inevitable. Ace knew what he was walking into. Hale wasn't a man who took kindly to threats or challenges, and Ace had made it clear that he was coming for him. But this wasn't just about him. It wasn't even about revenge anymore. It was about saving the town, the people who had been crushed under Hale's boot for far too long. Ace had made peace with his past, but now, for the first time in years, he saw a glimmer of something worth fighting for. The town watched in silence as Ace approached Hale's mansion, a man with a mission. Hale's men stood watch at every corner, but they knew better than to try and stop him. Word had spread that the gunman from the past had come back for blood, and anyone who knew Ace's name knew how dangerous he was. Ace didn't hesitate. He walked straight into the lion's den. The front door creaked as he entered, his boots muffled by the thick carpets of the mansion's grand hallway. Hale's voice rang out from the study, confident, mocking. "Did you come here to die, Ace? Because that's what'll happen if you make one wrong move." Ace's hand slowly slid toward his revolver. He had no intention of dying today, not when there was still a chance to save Sarah and the town from Hale's tyranny. The moment was tense, the air thick with the weight of the decision he'd made. He had a choice, to walk away and leave the town to its fate, or to face the man who had destroyed so many lives. "I didn't come here to die, Hale. I came here to end this," Ace said coldly. The sound of gunfire rang through the mansion like thunder. The standoff was intense, a deadly dance of silence and instinct. Ace's hand hovered over his revolver, his breathing slow and measured, as if every second could be his last. He didn't flinch when Hale's voice boomed, mocking and arrogant. "You think you can stop me, Ace? I've got a dozen men waiting for the signal. You'll be dead before you even pull that trigger." Ace didn't answer. He didn't need to. His mind was clear as it had always been before a gunfight. There was only the sound of his heartbeat and the echo of his footsteps in the large, opulent hallway. Then a sharp click. The door at the far end of the room opened, and Sarah was pushed forward by one of Hale's thugs. She looked terrified, her hands bound tightly, but when she saw Ace, something changed in her eyes. She wasn't just a hostage anymore. She was the reason Ace had come. She was the reason he couldn't walk away. "Let her go, Hale," Ace growled, his voice low, but with an edge that carried more than just a threat. It was a promise. Hale laughed, a cruel, bitter sound that echoed through the room. "And why would I do that, Ace? You're outnumbered, outgunned, and I've got nothing to lose. You're already dead." The gunfight broke out in an instant. A flurry of movement, bullets flying through the air, the sharp sound of gunfire ringing in Ace's ears. He moved like a shadow, a man with nothing left to lose. His hand was steady, his aim true. One by one, Hale's men fell, but it wasn't until Ace stood face to face with Hale that time seemed to slow. Hale reached for his gun, his face twisted in rage. But Ace was faster. The last bullet rang out, the sound deafening, and Hale's body slumped to the floor, lifeless. Sarah's eyes locked with Ace's, wide with disbelief and gratitude. The mansion fell silent as the dust settled. The fight was over. Hale was dead. But Ace didn't feel the rush of victory. He didn't feel triumph. As he holstered his revolver, the weight of his actions hit him. The town was free, but so much had been lost along the way. He had killed to save them, but at what cost? Sarah rushed to him, her arms around him in a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. But Ace didn't have words to offer her. He just stood there, staring at the fallen body of the man who had been the last obstacle between the town and freedom. In the end, Ace had gotten his revenge, but he knew there was no true redemption waiting for him. He had done what had to be done, but at what price? The town was quiet, eerily so. The sun had set, casting a deep orange glow over Marlow, but it felt like the end of something, not the beginning. Ace stood at the entrance of Hale's mansion, looking down at the lifeless body of the man who had terrorized these people for far too long. His revolver was still in his hand, its weight like a stone, heavy with the burden of what had been done. Sarah stood beside him, her hands still trembling, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The chains that had held her were gone, just like the man who had kept them in place. Yet there was no joy in her eyes, only the quiet recognition that while one evil had been defeated, there was always a price to pay. Ace turned away from Hale's body, his gaze falling on the broken town around him. The streets that had once been filled with fear were now silent, as if the air had finally cleared. The townsfolk, who had cowered in the shadows for years, began to emerge from their hiding places. Their faces were a mix of relief and disbelief. They looked to Ace as a savior, but he didn't feel like one. The sheriff's death had been avenged, but the past couldn't be erased by a single gunshot. Ace had killed men before, but never with the weight of redemption hanging over him. It wasn't just about ending the reign of terror. He'd wanted to prove something to himself, that he was more than the gunman who'd taken lives without a second thought. As Sarah walked beside him, her hand brushing his arm in gratitude, Ace couldn't help but feel the weight of every decision he'd made. The man he was now had been shaped by all the deaths, all the moments when he'd chosen the path of violence over peace. Could one act of justice change all of that? Could he ever find redemption? Or was he doomed to live with the scars of his past? The answer, he realized, was no. Redemption wasn't something you earned with a single act. It was something that lived in the small choices you made every day. Ace had done what was necessary, but he also understood that the road to true redemption was long, and it was one he would have to walk alone. Sarah, who had lost so much, was now free, and that was all that mattered. The town could rebuild, piece by piece. They would honor the sheriff's memory, and they would live with the freedom that Ace had given them. But as Ace looked toward the horizon, he knew his work wasn't over. He wasn't sure where the road would take him, but it would be a lonely one. The price of justice had been high, and now he had to pay it, one step at a time. The last bullet of justice isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a reminder that every choice we make carries a weight that we must eventually carry. While it's easy to glorify the idea of vengeance and justice, the truth is that no one is truly free from the consequences of their actions. In this story, Ace's redemption isn't about the people he saves or the justice he brings. It's about the understanding that no matter how much good he does, his past will always be a part of him. The lesson here is simple. Justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes, the most difficult part isn't the battle against those who harm others, but the battle within ourselves. Redemption comes not from one single act, but from how we choose to live our lives moving forward. Ace's story teaches us that true peace comes from confronting our past and striving to do better, even if the path is long and full of challenges.